Hello, my friends. It's so good to see you from all over and to know that for whatever reason, every single one of you is called to be together and to hear the story today and right now. And I want to start by bringing this guy in. This is actually the reason why I know this story. I got this sword in 2018 for a performance that was really a ritual that I was going to do. And I was cleaning the bathtub and the sword fell over. And I was like, is it time for you to talk to me right now? What's your name? What's your name? And the first name I heard was Arthur. And I was like, I don't think that's your name. I don't think that's your name. And then the sword said, Parsifal, Parsifal, Parsifal. And I did not know that story at that time. So I want to give thanks. And in a moment, I'd love for us to just drop in together and make a prayer. But before I say anything else, I had a partner at that time in 2016 who loved Joseph Campbell. And he was the one who brought Joseph Campbell into my life in a deeper way. And I remembered the recordings that we were listening to. And I remembered that name. I know this name. I know this name. So because my sword spoke that, I learned this story back then. We got two others coming in. Hi, Ali. Hey, there you are.
Hello.
Maritzu, who are you? Are you under
It's
a different
me.
name?
It's me. It's Maria.
Oh,
But
okay.
I was with the mobile phone, and now I'm with the computer. Hello. And because we are many
Shapeshifter.
Marias, that's yeah. Sorry.
I love it. So I was just saying, Ali, that the reason why I know this story is because of this sword, and this sword spoke its name of what it wanted to be. And now that you're here, actually, so Ali and I met in a storytelling circle online. And the first thing that they would always do, and I want to give thanks to them for that, is something that I really love, which is dialing into each other for a second. So for those of us who are on camera, let's look at each other for a moment. Just look. Just look. Just look. And for those who are off camera, we know that you're looking at us and we're looking at you too. Because I know that you're also looking. But let's send good tidings for this journey to each other. Let's send gratitude to each other for being here, for choosing to be here, for safe passage through this story held by the Great Mother. Let's wish for each other that whatever it is from this story that wants to speak to us today, let that happen. Let that passage be easeful. Let's give thanks for being here. And let's give thanks for what has drawn us to this story, but to story in general, and to being together across space and time, across far, far, far distances. For what in us knows, the old one that knows that we need the images, that we need that primordial energy, that we need the ancientness, to speak to that one in us that is not nourished by what we are receiving by modernity or the overculture. It is giving thanks to the one who remembers, that is alive inside every single one of us. And I thank you for accompanying me and holding this with me. As we stand in front of the bigness of something as an old, 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 old story. So I'm not a medieval literature scholar. I am a person that this story has touched deeply. And there are versions of this story coming out of the 12th and 13th centuries. And there are, if you read these stories, they will be different. There are characters and characters, I shouldn't even say that. There are beings in some of them that are not present in others. And this version in me, going back to that partner, past partner that I mentioned, bringing Joe Campbell into my life, that is the core of this telling for me. And closer to the version from Christian de Troyes. And there's also a version from Wolfram von Eschenbach. But it is the first time that we see the mention of this thing called the Grail. The Grail. And I love this story because there is a legend inside a legend inside a legend. And I want to start walking into that space with you. And I want us all before then to have a moment to put our voice into the space, as we always do. And I want you to imagine in this moment that we are making space inside of ourselves. And if you like, can you press your hands out with as much space as you like, or as much of a large or small gesture as you like that feels good, but we are just making space around ourselves for this story to come into. Imagine that we are all in the same wilderness place, the wilds of the deep heart together. And the beautiful thing about that place is that it looks different depending upon whose heart is seeing through. So this place can be everything and unique to each of us and all of us, but we have space, we have space, we have space for everything that we are and everything that we are bringing in. As we drop in, I want us to imagine, I want us to feel that we are walking over a bridge between one landmass and another landmass. And in the distance, you can just barely see some crackling thunder, a beautiful rainbow, some rain, some sun. There are castles and turrets and wilderness, but we are on the bridge. We are not there yet. And we are all walking together over this bridge that is forming in front of us in exactly the way that we are seeing it through our heart's eye. Maybe it's a bridge of breath. Maybe it's a rope bridge. Maybe it's a structural steel bridge. Maybe it's a bridge of bread, as the stories are nourishment. But whatever that is, let it form in front of you. And let us follow our feet walking on that. I want to tell you that there is a winged one circling above you and around you. Only you can recognize who this being is. But there is a beating of their wings. There is a protective quality there. There is a guardianship. There is a watching overness of this being as we are walking over this bridge. Let that being form in your mind. Maybe it is a bird that exists on earth. Maybe it is a mythical winged creature. Maybe it is an angel, but it has wings. And all of those beings are shepherding us across the bridge, over from this world into the myth world, which is always and forever closer than we think. So as we are all landing together, coming to stand on the other side of that bridge, I want to go around. Speak your name into the space. Speak that winged one into the space. Say what you need to say in order for us to arrive here together. So I'm going to go around. And also, if I know some folks can't unmute, and that is fine. So I'm actually I'm going to start backwards. I'm going to start with April. Thank all of you, because look at what you did. You walked right over the bridge and into the world. And the same prompt for everyone takes us to a different place. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to put this over here. And I will say, in the same way that that felt easeful to you, that we received what was there for us, we will walk slowly but surely into this story. Let it be what it needs to be for you. Let what it carries come to you easily and clearly and with the mystery, and let us all hold this space together to tell, to tell, to tell, to tell. And do what you want to or need to do with your cameras, off camera, on camera, whatever you like. To tell of a place in the forest that is filled with much light. This kind of warm light splitting down through the trees. There is a little place of living in this forest where there is a boy filled with such light and also with rambunctiousness and a kind of wildness. He lives there with his mother. This boy's father, he never met. He was killed out there in the nobility of doing what he did as a knight. Unbeknownst to this boy, his father had also sired another child from a black queen, as he had been sired from the white queen. And there was a brother somewhere out there for him in the world, but that is something we'll get to in time. This woman, this white queen who chose to bring her son deep into the forest and raise him there, wanted to keep him away from everything that had contributed to steal her husband away from her, take his life. Anything that had to do with knights and the court and war and fights. She kept him there and she filled his head with talk, God, and angels. And this was how it was for a time. This boy, who was learning what his power was, who made little things out of the sticks and rocks that he found in the forest, who liked to test his strength, who liked to see how far he could go. They say that the first time he killed a bird and learned what death was, he wept, sang over that bird words that he did not know from whence they came. One day this boy was out wandering in the forest, playing as he was wont to do, when there was a strange noise from the distance, and riding, thundering right into his view were 3 knights on horseback. Massive they were, shining with that light splitting through the forest. He had no other reference point. At first he thought maybe they were demons, but then as he looked at them and as he took in the light that was radiating off of them, he said, these must be angels, and he fell before them onto the ground. The knights, they laughed and said, boy, get up, what do you bow before us? And he said, please tell me who and what you are. Something so strong was erupting inside his heart, and he said, we are knights of the round table, serving under King Arthur. We come from a place called Camelot. And just receiving this feeling, something of a seeing, something of a knowing, and he knew at once, although he didn't know anything else about what this life meant or what this path was, he knew that he needed to go. Can you please tell me how to become what you are, how to get to where you have come from? And they gave him some instruction that was a little bit vague, so as not to make it too easy for the boy. And they rode off. The boy immediately erupted out from that place in the forest where he had fallen down and went to his mother and spilled all of this joy and excitement, this fire that filled his body to her. And he said, I want to be a knight. I want to be what they are. I saw something that I have never seen before. And of course, something in his mother's heart clenched and crunched, seeing at that time that although she had done everything she could to keep this life away from him, that here it was. She sat with this for a bit, and then seeing the fire in her son's eyes that she had never seen before, she knew that she was not going to be able to dissuade him until she did what she could, the advice that she gave him, and a certain itchy, strange homespun garment had made him look like a fool. Holy fool, but a fool nonetheless, one with kind of long sleeves and a hood made of kind of burlappy fabric. And she gave him the old farm horse that they had, and she said, this is what I give to you. Go out into the world, if you may, and you must. Parsifal had made some objects that he was going to bring with him, a long spear that he had spent a long time carving and making. He went out. He rode there in that garment with all of that fire flooding through his body, and he left. And what he did not know was that behind him, soon as he moved out of view, his mother collapsed to the ground and died of grief. Such a thing, such a thing, such a thing can come to pass. Such a thing can come to pass. He did not know, he did not know, he did not know at that time. Such was that fire flooding inside of him, this North Star that had never existed before, that was driving him onward. This sense of wildness and rambunctiousness, this inquisitiveness in the world suddenly having a shape to take. And the first thing he saw as he rode and rode and rode, trying to follow those knights' instructions, was a man on horseback in red, shining armor. And there was a tumult around the castle that he had been led to find. And so he was able to kind of sneak in, such as he was in the fool's garment and the old farm horse. And he heard the talk inside Arthur's castle about this red knight that had thrown the cup, the liquid, in the face of Queen Guinevere, who had wanted to take some of the land that was Arthur's. He heard all of these voices. He heard all of this noise, and he knew what he wanted and needed to do. He rode back out, he turned around, and he rode right for the Red Knight with that javelin that he had carved himself pointed. He said, surrender your armor, I am here to right the wrongs. And the Red Knight laughed. What else could he do? He wouldn't even think for a moment of trying to fight this youngling there on the farm horse. But Parsifal charged at him. And he saw that there was a slot in his visor where he could see a vulnerable part of his face. And he rode, and he opened his mouth, and a sound came out ripping through the forest, and he sent that lance right into the slot in the armor. Right into and through the Red Knight's eye, the Red Knight's head, the Red Knight's skull. And down he went. This was not an honorable way to kill a knight, let alone anyone, but it is the way that it happened. And there was Parsifal literally dragging the body around, trying to loose the pieces of armor off of this slain knight. And the page came out in horror, seeing what was going on, and helped the boy with what he was doing, the gruesome task, and took care of the body afterwards. But Parsifal was the Red Knight now, no longer on the farm horse. But I will say that he did not take off that mother's homespun garment, put the Red Knight's armor over it. He rode out into the distance. The first thing he came to was the castle, of whom he came to discover was an old knight, a man who had been in this practice for a long, long time. And when he came in dressed in such a way, he was welcomed. But when he took off the armor as well, that man was able to see that light shining inside of this boy, something there that made him different. This old knight had lost 3 of his sons in wars, in battles. And he had one lonely, lovely daughter who roamed the halls somewhere in that castle. This man, Gurnemanz, took Parsifal under his wing. He saw the hunger in him, the fire in him of what he wanted to learn. And so almost immediately he put him into training. Seeing Parsifal moving, learning, fighting, honing, listening to the advice this man was giving him, exhausting those warriors that this old knight gave him to contend with as he learned, as he learned, as he learned. He imparted wisdoms to him, wisdoms that came from his own life. And there was a certain one that landed with gravity amongst all the rest. He said to this boy, "You must remember, knights do not ask questions. You show up aligned with your duty. You move in that way, but you do not ask. Do not make the ripples in that way." So it went on. This piece of advice landing inside of him. There came a day when Gurnemanz, who had grown this admiration and love for this boy who came, who was under his tutelage, and he offered the hand of his daughter to Parsifal. And he thought for a moment, and he let it land inside of his body, and he said, "I would like to earn my wife, my love, my bride. And there are more things out there for me. I swear of it, I swear. So I will, with utter and such gratitude, I will take my leave." And they do say that for the first time, as Parsifal rode away, he was perceiving that conflict in his heart of something that he wanted to do and the hurt that it was causing, the disappointment back from whence he came. But he kept going onward. And this time on that horse, he let the reins go slack. And the horse, this beast of the instinctual nature, led him to another castle. This castle had warm lights in its stained glass windows. But it didn't take long for Parsifal to perceive that there was something else going on here. An offness of the energy, a distraughtness. And so he went inside, he listened, and he learned again he was welcomed because of the armor that he wore, the way that he was beginning to carry himself. And he learned there was a young queen who ruled over this castle and this kingdom, and that there was a king from far away who was bringing a great siege onto her castle, onto her land. And because he knew that he was more powerful and that she could not withstand him, he was going to force her to be his bride. This was the situation in which Parsifal was walking. He was given a bed. He was given a place to sleep for the night, as hospitable as these places are. When he woke in the night, he saw an apparition there at the edge of his bed, shining silver in the moonlight. Immediately, he got up as he saw that it was a young woman sitting there, tears coming down her face, brushing them away when she saw that he was awake. And he got up and said, "Please, if you want to take my bed, you can. I'll sleep somewhere else or on the floor." He remembered the things that his mother was teaching him about being a good man. She said, and I will quote this forever: "If you promise not to wrestle me, I'll get in the bed." I always hear Joe Campbell in my head saying that. And so she did. In that beautiful silver dress that she wore, her nightgown, nightshirt over. And there they were, with space in between. A tremulous kind of moment, a meeting of the two. And this time Parsifal got a different perspective on what he had heard going on downstairs when he arrived. This was the young queen whose kingdom was being besieged. And she told him with full honesty, "I would rather jump from the turrets above than marry someone like that." Didn't take long for Parsifal to know what he wanted to do, and he said, "Tomorrow morning, when that king comes, I will take care of him. I promise you that. I promise you that. I promise you." The next morning, that is exactly what happened. And Parsifal, with that prowess and that fire that had been kindled inside of him, the way that he was learning to move with that fire, he contended against that king, did not kill him, held that sword against his neck and said, "You leave here and you never come back." Such was a thing, such was a thing, such was a thing that came to pass. And it was a thing that as Parsifal moved along in his journey would end up happening. He would send these knights back to Camelot. King Arthur was noticing. That's a different part of the story. The next night, Parsifal awoke again to that apparition shining in the moonlight, sitting on the edge of his bed. With a gratitude blooming not only in her heart, but in her body. And again, they laid next to each other. And again, they shared breath. And again, the night felt endless. And they did not touch, they just talked for what felt like days and days. The next night came, and again, the sharing in the night. the space between them, the tremulousness of that energy, the purity of it, a sharing of lives, places, been, dreams, secrets, and places of their heart that no one had ever listened to. The third night passed, the third night passed, and as they say, this union was joined in the spirit before it was ever joined in the body. And when that joining, that unity came in the good old way, Parsifal and this young queen named Conduir Amors, the guide of love, they were wed. Parsifal was continuing his enthusiasm for adventure, giving to his wife, to this kingdom. And also, as I had said, those knights that he was coming into contact with and contending with, sending them back one by one back to Arthur's court. After some time, perhaps a year, perhaps 2 years, perhaps some time spent in that way, growing that relationship, that bond, that kingdom, the thought of his mother crossed his mind. It had been so long in this life, in this place, with this love, with this growing sense of what it was to be a knight, what it was to have honor. And he asked his young queen, may I go back to see how my mother is? Back there in the forest, splitting with light where I came from. And of course she blessed his way. Again, Parsifal got onto that horse, and again he let the reins go slack. As he rode along pathways he thought were familiar to him around that kingdom that he had come to know so well, there was a strange feeling that began to move through the landscape, through the air, through the very feeling of it. He began to feel like he didn't quite know where he was. Things felt a little bit colder, but not cold in a temperature sense, cold from the inside out, a strange kind of cold. And he began to become concerned as the sun set and the dusk filled its colors in the sky, that he did not want to be riding out there in that kind of place after dark. But he kept going, kept letting the horse move. And through the fog that was settling in the air, in the landscape, he saw that he was coming upon a large, silvery lake. There's something about the energy of this. Didn't feel immediately comforting, but it also didn't feel exactly foreboding either. There was something drawing him there, but before he could sort those feelings out in his head, he noticed there was a boat on this lake with a man inside of it who had his rod out into the water fishing. And on his head, he wore a crown made of peacock feathers. Hello out there, he called. Do you know if there is a place around here that I could stay? I don't know exactly if I've lost my way, but this is an unfamiliar place. And before Parsifal got to finish, the man turned to him, nodded in this strange and knowing way, and pointed into the distance. There is a place, my son, up that winding road, exactly where you see it, right around the bend. You will find a castle there where you can sleep for the night. I will see you there, and I will be your host. Parsifal kept his gaze on that fisherman, and then slowly let it drift to the side where the fog, he noticed, was beginning to wind above and up. There was a mountainous road that wound and wound, and he found himself on it, moving through the wind and the fog, up and up and up. After a while, he was beginning to think that it was going to travel on forever. He started looking down at the path, listening to the hooves of the horse, feeling the wind, trying to peer through the fog, and then suddenly it was there. And the landscape had all changed around him and in front of him, all the fog moving aside so that he could see this castle. Different from any castle that he had seen before. Something that he was drawn into and through, and some part of him was also trepidatious, but he went inside. Immediately, he beheld a strange and fantastic scene beyond anything that he had ever seen. For whatever the outside of the castle looked like, the cold in his bones, the way the landscape changed, this place was filled with a kind of otherworldly light. There was a sumptuous banquet, processions happening, people moving forth. There was filled to every edge. People. Parsifal watched. He was led into this room, the great hall. And he watched these people in procession, the things that they were carrying, the precious objects. He almost felt like he was in a dream, but he knew that he was here. He felt that cold in his body. He remembered the traversal. He knew that he was awake. And he kept watching. In from the side chamber, a man came with a spear that was bleeding at the tip. Down came the blood, down as far as his hand was holding the bottom of the spear, and everyone began to weep, and Parsifal watched this. People came in holding grand candelabras with flickering candle lights. Parsifal watched this, and then the most striking thing of all, in on a litter, carried by several men, came a king. A king that was radiating with the kind of pain that Parsifal could feel inside his own body. It wasn't clear to him what had happened or what was going on, but he was able to perceive that this king could not stand or even sit upright and that he was in pain, suffering. He saw as he looked closer that there was a peacock crown on this king's head, and that there seemed to be a wound at the center of him, a wound that filled the entirety of the room. Something in his heart so strong moved him to speak, to come close to the orbit of this radiatingness of suffering and ask what it was happening here. What this man was feeling, if there was anything he could do. Just as those words were arising, he remembered. He remembered that he was a knight. And he remembered from those foundations of teaching that had led him here, that had shown him all of the things that he had learned, all of the things that he had earned. Knights don't ask questions. They don't cause ripples in that way. So he said nothing. The king, who was almost wordless, had one of his servants come over to Parsifal and present him with a sword. A sword that he did not know at that moment, but was destined to break at a crucial moment. Parsifal saw all of these things, the suffering king, the bleeding lance, the candelabras, all of the people. And he saw also something that had been paraded, woven through the entirety of the scene for the entire evening. A grail. That depending on whose heart eye is seeing it, can appear as a golden dish or a radiating stone, shining chalice. But it was the truth. And it was there in that room. And seeing all of it, and in receiving the sword, Parsifal said nothing. And he went upstairs into a night of fitful sleep. The next morning, he awoke, and everything was deathly silent. All of the people, the processions, the otherworldly white light that had filled the space was gone. And he didn't understand. And everything that he saw the last night seemed even stranger now. And he looked around and he thought maybe there was another war or a siege that had started and everyone had drawn out. So he put on his things, got onto his horse, heard the echoing of the hooves on the stone floor. The drawbridge lowered. Saw nothing but mist in front of him in the wilderness. Slowly rode over the opened drawbridge. And right as he was crossing back over from that castle, which was the Grail castle of the wounded Fisher King, the drawbridge snapped up, hit the back of the horse so that it whinnied. But what had just happened? Again, he had that feeling of, was that dreamed? But I'm sure I am awake. I'm sure I am awake. And as he was thinking that, he saw another apparition ahead of him in the mists, in the trees. It was a young woman with light hair, silvery, fraying. Parsifal rubbed his eyes because it seemed at one moment that she was holding the body of a dead knight, and then he shook his head, and then she was alone. He went over to her, breathless, and she looked up at him. Her eyes changed for a moment, and she said, "Am I not mistaken? Are you coming from that direction? Are you coming from the Grail Castle?" Parsifal looked at her. There was a strangeness about her, an emaciatedness, as if she had been grieving for a long time. Slowly he nodded. "I did come from the castle behind me." Again, her eyes changed and widened. She said, "Then you must have done it if you were called there. What did you say? Did you ask the question?" "I didn't say anything," Percival said. Some kind of strange unease snaking its way up from the ground and into his guts. Before he could say anything else, he watched her entire countenance change. Her entire body change, the energy of it. That flickeringness of her in her grieving. "I know who you are, Parsifal. You are as good as dead now. You have no idea what you've done. Wasteland that will continue from what you didn't do." How does one behold such a thing? How does one behold a woman so wrought with grief, something that we don't even understand that has happened, the legend or laws that exist around us that we cannot see or perceive, but that sense of panic and dread rose even further up into his body, into his throat, and Parsifal could look at her, could behold her no longer, and he began riding into the mists, into that changed landscape. That coldness in his bones again. The tree branches dragging against his armor, the wind whipping, the plants growing downwards, dying, the animals falling silent. Wandering into this world is where we will leave Parsifal for now. There is a lot that just happened. And I want to leave space for that for a moment. Maybe you could also look around the room a little bit, look off into the distance. Remind yourself where you are for a moment as you come back. But keeping that thread into the dream of this story, we will do what we always do, which is feeding the story. Because so much just happened. Don't feel any pressure to track all of it, to know where it's going. The only thing that we can offer is what happened inside our bodies, our hearts, what happened that is personal to us. These myths that speak in the language of images, what image arrested you, what is staying with you. Maybe there is a part in the story where you just stopped and you have no idea what else I said. That is what we will offer up for this first half of this old story. Thank you. Thank you for these energies, so large and so deep and so big, being with us and with you. So whoever wants to say, you can raise your real hand. You can raise your virtual hand too, I don't mind. Okay. I would like, it's like a crappy way to say that. I would like to invite. I'm very aware that we are sitting for a long period of time. And so I would love, if you would like, if you're cool sitting or laying or whatever, like, do you be the Fisher King, lay on that litter, do what you need. But I'd love for us to stand up for a sec. And I'm actually just gonna like kind of talk us through something to just get us away from the screen, get us out of the chair for a minute. And also, yeah, if you want to take this moment as a little break or go get water or something, whatever you want to do, but just like, don't look at this screen anymore for a little bit. Shake it out a little bit, make some sound, stretch a little bit. Because remember in the beginning, we made a lot of space around us. We went over so many different bridges. We had winged ones with us. We have a lot of space here for all of these feelings, all of these questions, all of this reflection. So let's be in that space for a little bit. And just move things around. Because the body is so much a part of this process. The body is the one that is perceiving and receiving these images in these deeper ways than our mind can. So we're just showing our body that we're with it. We're letting things move. We're not just staying stationary. Then the next part of the story, I want to actually bring in what Kara was saying and what April mentioned just now about wanting to stay in those images. Oh, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte let me know that she needed to leave previously. So yes. I want to bring that in, that landscape, this being, radiating with such energy of suffering, of something that happened to this person and that landscape that he is in. What does it mean to be a king of a wasteland? What does it mean to have the sovereign wounded? How does it affect the land? So I want us to kind of walk back into that place where we first even saw the Fisher King, before we even knew that he was the wounded king. The feeling of that lake, the mists, the reeds that may be there, and the plants. Maybe we're even barefoot and we're squelching through that kind of mud that's always on the shore. Feeling the wind, the coldness. And so I'm gonna sit back down again, but if you need a little more time being up, you can take that too. But I do actually, I want to spend a little bit of time with this being. Because there is a story inside the story inside the story, as ever. The Fisher King is part of this lineage of holders and protectors of the Grail. But the thing about it is that he came into this position at such a young age that he did not know what he was protecting or carrying. Really, he just inherited this position. There was no real earning of it or journeying to get to this place. It came down in the line to him. And in that legend, inside this legend, we can drop in to maybe even a similar fiery sense that we saw in Parsifal, or that we have had in our younger days too. A feeling of kind of not quite drunkenness in power, but when you really can kind of feel in yourself, there he was, riding on that horse with the cry of amor, as they say that he did, without even perhaps really knowing what a groundedness is needed to even cry out with such a thing. To be a protector of something like the Grail. And so he was out in that thundering rush of his power. When they say that a pagan knight sprang out from the wilderness. And there are a lot of layers inside this story, depending which version it is and when it's being told. But the feeling that I have about a pagan knight, right? Someone that is carrying the old ways, someone that is carrying a wildness that is not present in the overculture or in the kingdom as it is. Something else, an otherness coming out from the wilderness. And that young king, who was not yet the Fisher King, riding in his power on that horse, right, doesn't hesitate at all when this being is coming out of the forest and towards him. He immediately charges. And he charges to kill. No hesitation. And when they meet, because that pagan knight is also charging towards him, and when they collide, that young Fisher King's lance kills the pagan knight. He's dead. But as that is happening, as that blow is being given into that pagan knight, the pagan knight's lance is unsexing the king. It's going right into the center place. And depending on who is telling it, it's told in different ways, right? It's a wound to his center, it's a wound to his thighs, it's a wound to that most vulnerable place, the place of virility, the place of vitality of the king. That is what happens. And it's said that the tip of that spear gets lodged in that wound. And so it's radiating in perpetuity. Joe Campbell said that there is a telling that on the tip of that spear it was inscribed the Grail, which is a whole other thing. But there is a legend inside a legend inside a legend. And that wound created a radiation out into that kingdom. An enchantment fell. Yeah, and Salima just messaged me as well about something going on. So we'll call everyone in at the end. But let's let that land for a second. Because every wound starts somewhere, even a one as storied as this. That wound created an enchantment. That wound created a wasteland. And in story, the funny thing they say, or at least in this story, is that the people who are under the enchantment, they actually know how the enchantment can be lifted, but they can't take action on it. So they know that if someone can come and from the purity of their heart, the spontaneous compassion, Joe Campbell says, of their own heart, if they can ask the question right into the space of that wound, what is it that ails you? The enchantment is lifted. And the thing that I think is so extraordinary is that it doesn't require these outward heroics. There is no fixing or curing or dragons that need to be slayed in this situation. It's just the question itself that needs to be asked. So that legend inside the legend inside the legend, that is what is at the heart of this. How Parsifal, this boy who wanted so much to be a knight, how that longing, how that loosening of the reins led him right to the Grail Castle, right into this wounding, right into this enchantment that he had no idea about. And he still doesn't in the place where we are in the story right now. You know how that feels. I'm certain that you do, because I do too. That we have no idea of the gravity of something that we have moved through. We do not have the bird's eye. We don't have the understanding. Perhaps we're not even supposed to. But Parsifal is there wandering into that wasteland with that feeling, still not knowing, not only just the specter of those images, of the feeling that it gave him inside his body, but that grief woman outside, sitting the base of the tree, telling him you're as good as dead for what you didn't do. There came a time in this wandering where the snow had fallen all along the course of the day. Sometimes we see things that move us in a way that we don't understand, and such a thing happened. A hawk had killed a crow. So there were dark feathers on the white snow. There were red drops of blood on the white snow. And when Parsifal came across this conglomeration of this image, these colors, this feeling, he found that he suddenly couldn't move from the spot. There was something of him, of his love in it. The colors of her, the colors of the night, the nights that they shared, of the white silveriness, of the red of her lip and her cheek. It seemed like years and years and years had passed since they had been together. Right at this time that Parsifal was transfixed in this wild image that had been presented to him, Arthur's court was actually moving across the land, trying to find this red knight who kept sending defeated other knights back to the kingdom. And they had their pavilion set up, and they were literally searching for this person. Their paths at this moment aligned. And the knights noticed someone standing there, transfixed, out there in the middle of the meadow. And some of the knights who were surlier than the others decided to try and take care of this problem and wake him up. And so they ran right towards Parsifal. And while he was in that trance of the image, I tell you that he was able to flip one knight and the next right over his shoulder, almost without even moving. One of the knights actually had a broken arm from this. But there was a knight that some of you may know, named Gwalchmai, the Hawk of May, Gawain, that we have heard from in other adventures with the Lady Ragnell. Gawain was part of this traveling band of knights under the Bear King Arthur. And he did not rush at Parsifal. He moved slowly, beheld him there, beheld the wild conglomeration on the snow, with the snow, looked at him, read the signs, and said, "This is a love trance. I know what this is." Gawain always had that sparkle of the lover in him, this knowing of these kind of things. And so he pulled out a handkerchief and he threw it over the snow and the black feathers and the blood, and almost immediately Parsifal snapped out of it. And he looked around. Who knows where he had gone in those moments? And he looked at this knight standing in front of him. And Gawain said to him, "I think that we have been looking for you. And that Arthur has too." So Parsifal, in this sudden moment, is suddenly brought into the center of this pavilion of all of these knights and ladies, King Arthur himself, that pavilion that they had made in the wilderness. The banquet spread out there. They had finally found him. And would you look at that? Parsifal had finally found them. Grown as he was from the place that he started. And there was much talk and there was much praise and catching up and a telling of the stories of these knights that had ended up there and this little legend of him that had been woven over time. And Parsifal felt the warmth of that moment, felt protected in it, so much so that the Grail Castle and the bleeding spear and the wounded king and the grief woman and the wasteland all seemed far away. He relaxed. He began to let himself relax into that moment. And then the landscape changed once again. There was the sense of some kind of ancient animal moving through the periphery. But it wasn't quite an animal, it was something else. Someone, something was changing the molecules in the air, was coming and circling around this pavilion, circling and circling with that animal energy seeming like a tusked boar or a screeching eagle. Or a wolf. Shining white teeth and piercing eyes. Into the clearing came a woman who was not quite a woman, not quite an animal. She was almost like the earth herself. She was the Grail messenger, sometimes known as Kundry. And she came and she pointed her gnarled finger, seeming like she was growing into the branch of a tree, seeming like she had roots coming up and growing around her, maybe even horns coming out the back of her head, her palms looking like large bare paws. So flickering was she in her shape-shiftingness. And she said, "King Arthur, you bring disgrace to your court by having this Parsifal here at your table." Everyone stopped. Everyone looked. This one. This one. Our voice, guttural. This one was in the presence of the wounded king. This one saw all there was to see, saw the bleeding lance, saw the wound, saw the grail, saw the king suffering, and said nothing. So closed up is your heart, so selfish are you, that you have radiated the wasteland out into and unto this world. You have no idea the death and destruction that you will bring, because you could not open your heart to such a thing. Disgrace on your head. How does one receive such a message? How the thing lands with utter sudden shock and yet slow as molten. And Parsifal looked around with this lead in his stomach, everyone looking at him. Kundry pointed again. There is a brother that you have that you know nothing about. Do you know this? There is a brother moving in the world who probably would have the courage in his heart to ask, to do the thing that you could not do. Your mother did not know of this either. And because of you, your mother died as soon as you left. Disgrace on your head. Disgrace on your head. Whatever else was intact in Parsifal in that moment collapsed. Could barely get out of his chair, stand to his feet. He wanted to throw up. He wanted to scream. He wanted to die. For how many things crisscrossing in his head? How many things could have been different? How many things that he didn't know? How many things were unintentional? But I wanted to. No words came out. He fell into the snow. Kundry proceeded to say some more words to Gawain and tell the gathered knights about the Castle of Wonders, another adventure that needed to be had, the maidens that were trapped and needed to be rescued. Parsifal couldn't hear anything. The words were so far away. He stayed on the floor for a long time. Arthur's court and the retinue were all dispersing. They couldn't really even look at him or say anything. When Parsifal finally got to his feet, he heard a voice coming from across the meadow. He saw Gawain on the horse, the one who could stand to look at him, and he said, Parsifal, may God be with you. And Parsifal said, I do not believe in God. Disappeared were the knights, and going. And if Parsifal thought he knew what the wasteland was before, now he really get to know. There were equal parts these strains of black burning rage to want to fight, to try to right this wrong. And also just the anguish and the grief at being betrayed in doing what he thought was the thing to do. He had to find the Grail Castle again. And he put everything else out of his mind. And just by sheer force of will, burning right through him, he tried tirelessly to find the castle again. This led him many, many, many miles, sometimes in circles into the distance, crossing of seas, many adventures, many other battles, many other victories even, but there was a hollowness inside of him that had never existed in such a way before. Haunted was he always by the Grail, by the wound of the Fisher King, and by the small twinklings of a remembrance of time in the bed in the dark talking to his wife. What seemed like thousands of years ago now. Things went on in this way. Who knows how long in story time? You and I both know. A little while in story time. It's decades in our time. Years in our time. Things went on like this. And when you burn from such a molten fire, eventually you're just left with this barely smoldering core that eventually grows cold. Cold was Parsifal. That day that ended up being Good Friday. When he was on horseback, moving through the woods, coming across a band of pilgrims in their worship, startled to see a knight in full armor, seeming like he had been through thousands of wars. They told him about another pilgrim, a man who took up hermitage long ago, and how he was somewhere in that forest. Without knowing why, Parsifal felt led to this place, the place where he and the pilgrims converged and diverged then. He saw a massive tree. Which seemed to once have a fantastic, full, abundant crowning, but was sheared off straight down the middle. He saw that there was a house built around and into this tree. He saw that there was a door right through the heartwood, right through the place of the wounding. And he let himself go there. He let himself go in. He was met by the eyes of someone that felt ancient to him. Someone that he felt like he knew without knowing. Some kind of feeling of slight disarmament in the energy inside that place. This man, the old hermit, said nothing but held his eyes for a long time. And he placed before him steaming bowl broth, pulled out the chair beside him, sat down at the humble table in the half light. When he raised his hand over the bowls, began to speak a prayer, began to speak of God, began to speak of the ones that watch over us. Parsifal almost could not stop himself, and he put his hand down on the table and said, I do not believe. Please do not let me hear this name. He felt ashamed for saying it for a moment, but that was how he felt. The man took a breath. And that gave him confirmation of what perhaps he was already feeling. He slowly began to speak in the way that those people do, who have also been through their own traverses and travails. They do not speak from a place of giving advice. They speak from a deep equanimity of being able to see right into the heart of the situation. What my teacher Danny says, the soul condition. He spoke from that place gently. And even though he was a man that followed God, he didn't need to use the word to bring him into this space. Something began to break slowly inside Parsifal, and he found himself speaking suddenly. And the rushes of tears that came through as he finally unearthed and unloosed all that he had been carrying for all those years. For this relative stranger, all I can think about is the Grail, my wife. The man took a breath again and said, "Does no use thinking of the Grail, because only those who are called to it will find it. Something came to pass that I found out about." And he began to tell him the story that I told you a little bit earlier, filling in the details that were up until this point empty about the Fisher King, about the enchantment, about the wound. And he said, on the Grail, a name appeared, as it does, about someone pure of heart who was going to come straight into the heart of that wound, into the castle, and be able to ask the question that would lift the enchantment from the wasteland. But I heard that he came and said nothing. Such a pity that is, isn't it? Parsifal almost couldn't hear anything else at this time. Again, he had that feeling of being under the water, but he said to this man that he was loosing all of his heart to. It was me. It was me. It was me. It was me. And I need to get back there. I've been trying to get back there. And the man again looked with all the love that he could muster in his eyes, but you can't. There is no way to will yourself back to the Grail Castle. That is part of what all of this is, God's law. I will do it. Before he could say anything else, one moment fell and flooded into the next, and he found that he was remaining there with that hermit for a span that became day after day after day, and then 2 weeks. The things that he was able to remember, the things that they were able to talk about, it felt like a returning to the wood of his childhood. He remembered that first bird that he killed and the song that he sang over it. First time he learned what death was. At the end of that time, Parsifal was sobered in a way, but more so deepened. Not that he had cast off what he had been through, but that he was allowing himself to wear it. To have had experienced again the things that he had done and not done. And feel some sense of isness about it all. Some sense of responsibility and some sense of forgiveness. He left the hermit in the time in the wood. Again on his horse and moving. He was not really trying to get anywhere at that moment. He was just letting land what had moved through him, what he had heard, what he had allowed himself to feel finally after all this time. And then a knight appeared ahead of him. He steeled himself for what he needed to do, to defend himself. Began riding towards this knight from such a far distance. The knight was coming ever closer as well, riding closer, 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 until a page came running, screaming, "Gawain, no, it's Parsifal!" And they stopped. And each man slipped off the side of their horse and held on to each other's shoulders. Looked into a pair of familiar eyes. I don't know if I thought I'd ever see you again, and yet Gawain told Parsifal about that castle of wonders, that adventure that Kundry had given him, that he had fallen in love, that everything had come to pass, and that there was a huge multiple wedding feast going on back at the castle, and that Parsifal should come with him and be welcomed back in after all this time. And such it was. Such it was that he was able to re-enter as this person that he was now. And all around him, he saw the merrymaking. All around him, the sensuality and the love and the abundance and the fecundity of the celebration of the adventure that had just come to pass. And he saw how Arthur was there, blessing over the unions between a knight and a lady, a knight and a lady. Felt overwhelming suddenly to be in such a place with so many feelings moving around the room, to have the eyes of beautiful women landing on him. And he said, I can't be here. I need to find Conduira Moors. I need to go find my wife. This is not the place. And he thanked everyone in a subtle way and slipped out, remembering those nights, the talks that they had the first time he saw her apparition at the edge of his bed, the silvery moonlight. How young he was then. How he wanted to fix everything, be a hero. He was lost in his thoughts as his horse was moving, and then out from the wilderness came another night. A night that held that spell of otherness, of wildness. It was a night that had come from another land far away, that had their own retinue, their own ships, their own treasures. Out from the wilderness this night sprang. Parsifal held, did not go rushing towards him, just held. Each horse pressing off on the ground, straightening up, until they decided at the same moment to charge. Charge they did, straight at each other. And can you imagine the surprise, the splintering of each lance on each shield, when neither horseman was ejected from the saddle? And so again, they rode towards each other, and more of the lances splintered, and again they circled around each other, and again they charged at each other until the horses became exhausted. And they each slipped off their horses. And Parsifal still had that sword that he was given by the Fisher King all those years ago. And with that small blooming promise of fire, of hearth, of home, of love, he screamed out into the air, all the smoke from the cold billowing out of his mouth, and crashed that sword down on the other night. The sword shattered, just as it was said to do, to break at a crucial moment. This knight, holding his own sword, immediately seeing this, reeling, stumbling over but not falling over, standing upright, still holding his sword, looked at Parsifal, swordless now. And said, I will not fight an uneven fight. put his sword down on the ground. He will not fight a weaponless knight. Do you want to talk to me? Because something is telling me that we should. Each night in silence, in that meadow bordered all around by the thickness of the wilderness, took off their helmets. And Parsifal saw that this knight had a strange and beautiful complexion. He was black and white, like a magpie. And as he looked into his eyes, he saw something of the other and something of himself and something that he could not name. And as they began to talk, at first from a distance and then closer and closer still, they realized that they were sired by the same father. Gafmaret, who went out into lands and lands and lands beyond, fathered a son with the Black Queen. This was his half. Parsifal thought, what is there to do? What is there to do in this moment except bring him back into the fold, into the warmth of that place that I knew, castle of King Arthur. And he brought him back. And there they all were. The knights and Arthur, the Bear King. And everyone that was receiving this magpie knight and Parsifal, and all of those glances of the ladies now falling on him. The molecules changed in the air again. And that presence, primordialness, ancientness, animal feelingness of the tusked boar and the screeching eagle and the sharp-fanged wolf came in through the door. Parsifal's spirit reeled in his body for a moment, but then he saw the look on her face. She said, by the loyalty in your heart, your persistence to love and honor, what has befallen you can change. It was Kundry. It was the Grail messenger who had been watching in her ways all along from the edges, who had seen all of the things, perhaps even what was held inside his secret heart, the transformation. You would come with me, Parsifal. I will take you to the Grail Castle. And when we go, what is there for you will be there. Your wife, Conduira Moors, and your 2 sons. All of it will be there. You come. And so Parsifal brought his magpie brother, born from the otherness and the wildness sprung out, holding the tension of what he could see and not see, what he could know and not know. He brought him with him, and they followed the animal woman, the Grail messenger, the deep time primordial woman, the moving of the earth herself. At the end of all our exploring, we will arrive where we first started and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot's words. For that moment, with the flooding of light inside the Grail castle, on the misty mountain that was always somehow closer than we could ever imagine. And this time, when that feeling filled his body and the tears came to his eyes after seeing the bleeding spear and the candelabrum and the radiation of the Grail, Parsifal, all of his selves that were there present in the moment, knelt before the perpetual wound, put his face as close as he could, his hand on the side of his cheek, and asked, "What is it that ails you, uncle?" The light that filled the place was unmistakable. It's a light that maybe you feel radiating through you right now, or that has a promise, a potentiality to radiate through you right now. The promise of an impossible task, an impossible quest. A heart that can open again even after it is closed. The lifting of an enchantment that seemed possibly long. The crowning of a new king. One who had pierced the valley. Percival, Parzival, Parsifal. Walked the way that can thread. Fire and the grief, the joy and the sorrow, truth and love. A new king was crowned. One who would honor for all time that gift of the Grail. It has been told many ways throughout time and space and history. This has been my way. A way with help always from the unseen world and the storytellers of old and my teachers. And the ones who have walked with me through the wasteland, back to the Grail Castle. And every time we choose to ask the question, this has been my way of humbly telling Parsifal and the legend of the Fisher King. I give thanks for whatever has landed in you, and we give space for that. And we will run the clock out with your words, your offerings back to the story. This journey that unfolded before our eyes, with us across space and time. We offer back to the story one more time in this container. What will stay with us? What has moved us? What we will remember from this adventure together. Thank you for all those hearts. Who wants to go first? Hey, Matthew. Who wants to offer something first? I apologize that we are like right on the edge of time because I want to close us out. That I had no idea how any of that was going to happen. I did not run or rehearse the story at all, partially inspired again by Kara and Kat. I was in their storytelling winter solstice gathering the other day and just witnessing women letting the story just loose between them. So this is, I told the story the first time in 2021. I told it to myself one day, sometime after that, and then it was today. So thank you, because I've been carrying this since it emerged again. And thank you for coming with me and letting me hang the guts out and hear the call and let the words come through in the way that it did, because it came through in this way just for you the first time, and for me and the world and the story. So thank you for the beautiful comments and reflections, and just your hearts and your bodies being able to hold something of this size and magnitude, and just how the truth of the world seems in it, like we were saying about the forgiveness and the grief and the like literal utter pain and suffering and the joy and the love that leads us back around. So I'm gonna hold on. I have my fool's garment here, actually. That was and I'm gonna bring the sword in. So let's make a prayer together for the going out of this, and I will put us on an email again. And yeah, because I did a recording this time, which never happens. I will send that out afterwards. But actually, before I just like pray us out. Anyone have any other last that I feel like I like did that too quickly. Anyone else have? Thank you. Thank you so much. My friend Chase, who is also a storyteller, said of a cinder biter story. He's like, I could tell you tell you what's happened to me in my life, or I can tell you the story, and this story will tell you clearer and deeper than anything that I could. And that's how I feel about this story. Could say a million things about it, but thank you for seeing me in it. Thank you so much. Yeah, anyone else have any last thoughts? And you don't have to, no worries. Oh my God. Okay. I want us to think about those bridges that we came in over. And also Charlotte and Salima, who were with us earlier. Letting that landscape of this story and everything that it moved inside of us, all of the beings in it, the landscapes in it, the wilderness, the wasteland, the grief woman, Kundry, Gawain, the love trance, Condwirramore, Gurnamons, the Hermit, the Pilgrims on Good Friday. There's so many. King Arthur, the Bear King. The Mother who died of grief. The Knights. The Red Knight. So many and so many reflections of us. And the Fisher King, of course. As we walk back over the bridges that we came in on, maybe that winged or unwinged being still flying around, protecting you in your traversal back to the world, in our rooms, in all of our respective places in the world. We needed some of that high-flying mythic energy to accompany us in making such a leap. As we return, all of us together, as Salima earlier so beautifully said, of this band of hunter-gatherers, all of us together, our togetherness. Let the way this story wove inside of us continue to weave us together. And also let us retain our individuality. Let everything that belongs to each of you and everything belongs to each of me stay ours as it is. And what we made here together in the center of this space, let us keep what is serving to us and let us feel permission always to let anything else compost down to the dark earth. May we have the courage to do the heroic act, to see the self and ask the question, to see the other and ask the question. And to know that it is this village that we recreate every time that we do this. And that it is good, so good for us to hear story and for us to be together. Let this story walk with you in a good way. Let it be a place for you to return to. May you return to those places that you thought you knew and see them for the first time. Thank you for letting me be an accompaniment to you on this journey. Thank you for seeing me inside of this story. Wow, okay. Thank you, PARSIFAL, for all you teach and have taught. Thank you to the teachers that brought this story. Thank you to the Great Mother for holding us and the way that your breath and your energy is woven into all of this. May we remember that wounding that comes from disconnection from you. And may we be curious enough and spontaneous of heart to ask into and tend to that question. Go well, and I love you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.